Soldier feeds a puppy in 1943. When historians zoom in, they are amazed. At the National World War II Archives in College Park, Maryland, military historian Dr. Sarah Chen meticulously examines a collection of photographs donated by the family of the late veteran Sergeant Michael Thompson. Among the images from the 1943 Italian campaign, one apparently simple photograph catches her attention: a young American soldier kneeling in what appears to be a bombed village, tenderly feeding a small puppy with a can of military rations. The image, taken in November 1943 according to the annotations on the back, shows the soldier smiling while the puppy eats from his hands, with destroyed buildings visible in the background. It's a moving scene that captures a moment of humanity amid the horror of war, the type of image that had become iconic for showing the compassion of American troops toward European civilians. But when Chen enlarges the image using high-resolution technology for the archive's digitization project, she notices something that makes her pause and examine more carefully. In the lower right corner of the photograph, partially visible behind the rubble of what had been a house, there is something that doesn't fit with the apparent narrative of the image. She uses a digital magnifying glass to examine the area more closely, adjusting contrast and clarity. What she sees leaves her completely surprised. It's not a puppy that the soldier is feeding. The detailed analysis reveals characteristics that are completely different from those of a dog. The body proportions, the shape of the limbs, and especially the facial structure visible in the animal's profile. Chen feels her heart racing as she verifies her observations again and again. After 4 decades studying war photographs, she's certain of what she's seeing, but the implication is so extraordinary that she needs confirmation from other experts before reaching a conclusion that could rewrite this small piece of military history. Chen immediately contacts Dr. Robert Martinez, a zoologist specializing in primatology at the Smithsonian Institute, and Dr. James Anderson, an expert in forensic analysis of historical photographs. During a 3-hour video conference, the 3 specialists examine every detail of the enlarged image. Dr. Martinez, with over 20 years of experience studying primates, is categorical in his evaluation. Without a doubt, the animal the soldier is feeding is a young chimpanzee, probably 6 to 8 months old. The body proportions, limb length, hand structure, and especially the distinctive skull shape are unmistakable characteristics of a juvenile pan-troglodytes. Dr. Anderson confirms the photograph's authenticity. The paper, chemicals used, photographic technique, everything corresponds exactly to 1943. There are no signs of manipulation or subsequent alteration. The image is completely genuine, but this creates a puzzling historical mystery. What was a baby chimpanzee doing in an Italian war zone in 1943? Chimpanzees are not native to Europe, and during the war, transporting exotic animals would have been practically impossible. Chen examines the soldier in the image more carefully. His uniform corresponds to standard equipment of the 5th American Army during the Italian campaign. His unit patch, though blurry, seems to correspond to an infantry division. His apparent age is 20 to 25 years, and his expression shows genuine tenderness toward the animal. There's nothing in his posture or expression suggesting he finds the situation unusual. The 3 specialists reach the same disturbing conclusion. The photograph genuinely shows an American soldier feeding a baby chimpanzee in Italy in 1943, but none can explain how such a situation is possible. Dr. Martinez suggests we need to investigate if there was any zoo, circus, or research facility in the area that could explain this animal's presence. Chen dives into American, British, and Italian military archives, searching for any reference to exotic animals in the 1943 Italian campaign. Records from the 5th Army show that in November 1943, American troops had been advancing north from Naples, liberating towns and cities along the Italian peninsula. The photograph had been taken in the vicinity of Cassino, an area that had seen intense fighting and bombing. Chen finds references to the liberation of a small town called San Pietro, where troops had discovered an unusual facility that had been abandoned by retreating German forces. Military reports describe the discovery of an experimental facility containing scientific equipment and several animals in deplorable conditions. The official report, classified for decades, specifically mentions laboratory primates in severe malnutrition that had been found in improvised cages. Dr. Franz Kellner, an Austrian scientist who had been working for the Nazi regime, had established a temporary laboratory in San Pietro to continue experiments that had begun in Germany. Documents reveal that Kellner had been researching the effects of extreme stress and deprivation on primates, possibly as part of studies related to human resistance under war conditions. When German forces had retreated precipitously, they had abandoned the laboratory and animals. American soldiers who had liberated San Pietro had found several young chimpanzees in terrible conditions. According to the report by Captain William Hayes, the unit's medical officer, the men have shown extraordinary compassion toward these creatures, providing them with food and basic care until they can be transferred to appropriate facilities. The report continues. It's remarkable to observe how these young soldiers, hardened by months of combat, show such tenderness toward these animals that have clearly suffered. The photograph had captured one of these moments of spontaneous compassion. Declassified archives reveal disturbing details about the facility American troops had liberated in San Pietro. Dr. Franz Kellner had been a respected scientist in Austria before the war, specializing in animal behavior and comparative psychology. When the Nazis annexed Austria in 1938, Kellner had been recruited to work on secret Reich research programs. His initial experiments in Berlin had involved studies on stress resistance and interrogation methods, using primates as test subjects due to their neurological similarity to humans. In 1943, when Allied forces intensified bombing in Germany, many research facilities were evacuated to safer locations in occupied territories. Kellner had been sent to Italy with equipment and animals to continue his research in a more protected environment. The laboratory in San Pietro had been established in an abandoned villa on the town's outskirts, previously used as a summer home by an Italian aristocratic family. The Germans had converted the basement into an improvised laboratory, installing cages, monitoring equipment, and basic facilities for maintaining experimental animals. Documents indicate that Kellner had brought 5 young chimpanzees from Germany, all born in captivity at German research facilities. The experiments had involved food deprivation, exposure to intense noise, simulating bombardments, and separation from social groups to study stress responses. American medical reports describe the animal's condition when found: severely malnourished, showing signs of psychological trauma, but surprisingly receptive to gentle human contact. Dr. Hayes had noted, it's as if these animals were desperate for affection after months of cruel treatment. The soldiers had responded instinctively with compassion, sharing their rations and providing the physical contact the animals clearly craved. Records from the Fifth Army reveal that American soldiers' response to the rescued chimpanzees had been extraordinarily emotional and spontaneous. Sergeant Michael Thompson, identified as the soldier in the photograph, had served as squad leader in the 36th Texas Infantry Division. His unit had been one of the first to enter San Pietro after German forces retreated. In letters sent to his family in Houston, Thompson had described the discovery. "We found something terrible here, Mama. There were little monkeys in cages treated very badly by the Germans. They were so skinny and scared it broke your heart. The boys and I have been taking care of them, giving them our rations. We can't do much more, but at least we can show them that not all humans are cruel." Documents show that several soldiers from the unit had informally adopted the chimpanzees during the 2 weeks they remained in San Pietro. They had improvised shelters, shared food, and provided constant companionship to the traumatized animals. Corporal James Mitchell had written in his diary, "It's strange how caring for these little creatures helps us remember our own humanity after everything we've seen in this war." Medical officers had documented that caring for the animals had positive psychological effects on the soldiers, many of whom had been struggling with combat fatigue and trauma. Dr. Hayes had observed, "The men who have been most affected by combat show the greatest tenderness toward these animals. It's as if they're channeling all their repressed compassion toward these innocent creatures." The photograph had captured this unique moment of mutual healing, soldiers traumatized by war finding purpose, and humanity in caring for animals that had suffered similar trauma. The small chimpanzee Thompson was feeding had been nicknamed Liberty by the soldiers, symbolizing both its liberation from the Nazi laboratory and the freedom American troops were fighting to defend. Archives reveal the final fate of the 5 rescued chimpanzees, a story that combines tragedy, hope, and the lasting impact of human compassion during wartime. After 2 weeks in San Pietro, military authorities had decided the animals needed specialized veterinary care that couldn't be provided in an active combat zone. The chimpanzees were initially transferred to a military veterinary hospital in Naples, where Army veterinarians evaluated their physical and psychological condition. Dr. Captain Robert Wilson, chief veterinarian, had reported, "These animals show significant signs of malnutrition and trauma, but their response to gentle human care is remarkable. Their physical recovery will be possible, but psychological damage may be permanent." 3 of the chimpanzees, including Liberty, were eventually transferred to the London Zoo, which had offered to provide them with long-term care. Zoo records show they arrived in January 1944, accompanied by a letter from Sergeant Thompson that said, "Please take good care of Liberty. He taught us that even in the most terrible war, kindness still matters." The other 2 chimpanzees were sent to a research facility in the United States, where they were used for trauma and recovery studies, ironically similar to their original experience, but under humane and ethical conditions. London Zoo records document that the 3 chimpanzees gradually adapted to their new environment, though they maintained unusual behaviors suggesting their traumatic experience. Liberty had developed a particular preference for zoo visitors wearing military uniforms, approaching his exhibit barrier when he saw soldiers. The main caretaker, Albert Morrison, had noted, "It's as if he remembers the kindness he received from American soldiers." Liberty lived at London Zoo until 1961, becoming one of the most beloved residents for his gentle personality and apparent understanding of human fragility. When he died at 18, the zoo installed a small plaque that read, "Liberty, rescued by American soldiers in Italy, 1943, a symbol of compassion in dark times." Research reveals that the encounter with rescued chimpanzees had a profound and lasting impact on the soldiers involved, influencing their lives long after the war ended. Military medical records show that members of Sergeant Thompson's unit had reported significantly lower levels of post-traumatic stress symptoms compared to other units that had seen similar combat. Dr. Hayes had theorized that the act of caring for vulnerable creatures had provided soldiers with a way to process their own trauma while doing something constructive and meaningful. After the war, Thompson had returned to Houston, where he established a charity dedicated to rescuing abandoned animals. In interviews decades later, he had explained, "Those little monkeys taught me that no matter how bad the world gets, we can always choose to be kind. That lesson saved my life more than any military training." Corporal Mitchell had become a veterinarian after the war, specializing in care for traumatized animals. He had frequently cited his experience in San Pietro as the moment that defined his career. "Seeing how those animals responded to love after so much abuse showed me the power of healing. I dedicated my life to that lesson." Other unit members had pursued careers related to animal care, education, or social work, all citing the experience with chimpanzees as a transformative moment. Documents show that unit veterans had maintained correspondence for decades, meeting annually on Veterans Day to remember not only fallen comrades, but also Liberty and his brothers. In 1963, on the 20th anniversary of San Pietro's liberation, they had visited London Zoo together to see Liberty, now a fully developed adult chimpanzee. Morrison, the caretaker, had reported that Liberty had shown signs of recognition when he saw Thompson, approaching the glass and extending his hand as he had done as a baby. Thompson had cried, telling Morrison, "He saved me as much as I saved him." Declassified documents reveal a deeper and more disturbing scientific connection. Dr. Franz Kellner had been conducting his experiments as part of a secret Nazi program to develop interrogation and psychological control techniques. OSS, Office of Strategic Services Archives, show that after the war, Allied intelligence had discovered that the San Pietro laboratory was part of a broader network of research facilities studying methods to break human psychological resistance. The experiments on chimpanzees had been designed to identify stress tolerance limits, effective deprivation techniques, and methods for creating psychological dependence on captors. Kellner had been developing what would later be known as brainwashing techniques, decades before the term was coined. Records show that after the German retreat, Kellner had managed to escape to Switzerland, taking his experimental data with him. Allied intelligence had been actively searching for him as a war criminal, but he was never captured. In 1947, it was reported that he was working for intelligence agencies of a foreign power, possibly applying techniques developed on animals to human interrogations. Documents reveal that Kellner's experimental data was subsequently studied by American and British military psychologists who were interested in developing countermeasures to protect their own soldiers against similar techniques. The research had indirectly contributed to developing resistance training programs for pilots and intelligence personnel who might be captured. Dr. Chen observes, "The irony is devastating. The same animals that were tortured to develop techniques for breaking human will ended up teaching American soldiers about the importance of compassion and humanity." Documents suggest that the instinctive compassion response shown by Thompson and his unit had been exactly the opposite of what Kellner had been trying to eliminate, the innate human capacity for empathy and care for the vulnerable. Research discovers that the story of rescued chimpanzees had implications extending far beyond the moment captured in the photograph. London Zoo records reveal that Liberty and his companions had become pioneering study subjects on animal trauma and recovery, contributing to the development of modern techniques for rehabilitating abused animals. Dr. Margaret Foster, a British primatologist who had worked extensively with the rescued chimpanzees, had published papers that established foundations for modern understanding of psychological trauma in primates. Her observations on how Liberty and others responded to different types of human interaction had influenced animal-assisted therapy techniques that were subsequently applied in veterans' hospitals. Documents show that Thompson had maintained correspondence with Dr. Foster for years, providing details about chimpanzee behavior during their rescue that had been crucial for understanding their recovery process. In 1955, Foster had visited Thompson in Houston, where she had directly observed how the experience with chimpanzees had influenced his work with rescued animals. She had written, "Sergeant Thompson possesses an intuitive understanding of animal trauma that surpasses many years of formal training. His experience in San Pietro taught him to read stress and response signals that most people would never notice." Records also reveal that several other soldiers involved in the rescue had contributed to advances in related fields. Mitchell, who had become a veterinarian, had developed protocols for treating war animals, military dogs, horses, and other animals that had experienced trauma in combat zones. His work had been directly influenced by techniques he had observed working with the chimpanzees in San Pietro. Veterans Department documents show that the group of soldiers who had rescued the chimpanzees had experienced significantly lower rates of alcoholism, depression, and other problems common among war veterans. Military psychologists had theorized that the experience of caring for vulnerable beings had provided a healthy way to process their own trauma. The photograph of Sergeant Thompson feeding chimpanzee Liberty becomes a powerful symbol that transcends its specific historical moment, representing the human capacity to maintain compassion and humanity even in the most brutal circumstances. Chen publishes her findings in a book titled Compassion in Combat: The Hidden Story of San Pietro, which reveals not only the story of rescued chimpanzees, but also broader connections between trauma, recovery, and the healing power of caring for others. The photograph inspires new understanding of how soldiers process traumatic experiences and how apparently small acts of kindness can have profound and lasting impacts. Thompson's descendants donate the original photograph to the National World War II Museum, where it becomes the center of an exhibition on humanity in war that explores how soldiers maintained their compassion during humanity's most destructive conflict. The exhibition includes letters from Thompson, documents from London Zoo, and video testimonies from surviving veterans who had participated in the rescue. Liberty, the chimpanzee in the photograph, is posthumously recognized as a symbol of resistance and recovery. London Zoo establishes the Liberty Fund to support rescue and rehabilitation of animals traumatized by armed conflicts, continuing the legacy of compassion that had begun in a bombed villa in Italy. The story inspires additional research on the therapeutic role of animal care for veterans with PTSD. Several veterans programs adopt techniques originally developed through studying Liberty and his companions, creating a living legacy that connects World War II trauma with modern healing. Dr. Chen concludes, "This photograph reminds us that even in humanity's darkest moments, compassion remains a powerful force of resistance against dehumanization." Thompson and Liberty saved each other, demonstrating that kindness is both an act of rebellion and healing. The image that had seemed to simply show a soldier feeding a pet had revealed a complex story about trauma, recovery, and the profound connection between humans and animals that transcends species barriers in moments of shared vulnerability.